Hello, I'm Stephanie Foster, and today we're going to talk about the impact of cognitive biases. So, first, we're going to talk about where these biases come from. So, a lot of these arise from heuristics, which is any approach to problem solving or learning that meets immediate objectives. So, these biases can also be classified into four different categories depending on where they're coming from. So, they're most commonly developed from when you're taking in too much information, when you're acting too quickly, the information you're receiving doesn't have enough meaning, or just the general limitations that our memory allows. So these biases can affect financial and economic decisions as well as just our everyday life decisions. Some biases that are very important and often go unnoticed in our everyday decision making are hindsight bias, overconfidence bias, and anchoring bias. So these are all very common issues in regards to financial decisions, but they're also very common in many other areas. So now we're going to talk about the hindsight bias. This is the I knew it all along bias. It's the idea that people predicted the outcome correctly or they overestimated their ability to forecast results. This bias is also linked to cognitive inputs, and people tend to have a selective memory that links this past information that they received to what they know now. This is a very common phenomenon in the financial world, especially in investing. One area where hindsight bias is extremely common is when we're experiencing financial bubbles. There's been evidence since hindsight bias since the tulip mania bubble in the 1600s to our somewhat recent 2008 housing bubble. Many analysts and other professionals claim that they saw this bubble coming when in reality they didn't. If everyone who said they saw it coming actually did, then these events could have been avoided or they would have had less of an impact on our economy. We also see this example every day. um, One common example is when someone thinks they can predict the weather. You see dark clouds during the day and it looks like you're going to rain, and when it does, they think they were right all along and were certain about the weather before. This allows the individual to become overconfident in their abilities to predict a certain outcome and that they believe that they can predict the weather again in the future. So, hindsight bias leads to an equally dangerous bias, which is overconfidence bias, which we'll talk about in the next slide. So now we're going to move on to overconfidence bias. This is usually where a person's confidence is much greater than their accuracy. So this bias is broken down into three different categories, and this is the overestimation of one's performance, the overplacement of one's performance in comparison to others, and the overprecision in expressing their certain accuracy of their own beliefs. So, this overconfidence bias may be stronger in certain individuals compared to others because we all have differing core self evaluations. So, those who have a higher core self evaluation are confident, but they're more likely to become overconfident the higher their evaluation is. So, some studies have shown that younger and less experienced investors tend to be more confident, and this is often due to the fact that they have not yet discovered their true abilities because they have not had enough experience with real world investing. They often still have very high confidence in themselves because they not yet have to face losses on a bad investment. So, other than investing, overconfidence bias is very common in the real world. So, one example of this is if someone thinks that they're going to get into a certain college, they may apply only to one and then not look into any other colleges and not apply to any other colleges because they're sure that they're going to get in. But then, if they don't receive their acceptance letter, then this could potentially result in them not getting into other schools due to late notice or they having to put off college for a semester until they can reapply. Last but not least, we're going to talk about anchoring bias. This is also another cognitive bias that has a great impact on the financial world as well as everyday life. Anchoring bias is relying too heavily on one piece of information when one is going through the decision-making process. So the anchor is typically the first piece of information that individuals receive, and then they use that to make their following decisions. So this bias can cause irrational behavior in the investing realm. So an investor or financial advisor may have a certain opinion on an industry, which may lead them to not want to invest in that industry, even if there is opportunity for higher returns. For example, if someone is convinced that there's a recession coming just because they heard it from another analyst or another source, even if there's no supporting evidence to this claim, they might be more biased to investing in a more stable, less volatile industry such as consumer staples because those that industry technically or tends to stay less volatile than other industries when experiencing economic downturns. So many people don't even realize that they're experiencing this bias. One very common example in everyday life is just when you're purchasing a car. So the first price that you see at a dealer, that tends to be the price that you base the rest of your negotiations off. So if that price is high and you go and see the car for a lower price at a different dealer, then this is leading you to believe that you're getting a good deal on the car when in reality that car still may be overpriced.